Welcome back to BR24 Live on the Munich Security Conference with the last panel discussion of the day, titled Protectonic Shifts, Global Trade Under Pressure. And we will be diving right into it.
Global trade is under pressure. It's called Protectonic Shift, which is a particularly good title by the Munich Security Conference. But I think the answer to the question is, of course, yes. There is no question, I think, that the global trading regime is under pressure. Multilateralism is a word that we like to use, but it's not very clear that that is still apposite in global trade. If you think back just a few years, there were concerns about the trade regime of China and the Trump tariffs. Then it was accelerated by the pandemic and the focus on national resilience, the weaponization of economic tools, the aftermath, obviously, of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the differential approaches that countries have taken to climate change. All of these trends have put the global trade regime under pressure. So the question is, how bad is it? Where's it going? And what do we do to save global trade? And to answer that, a wonderful panel. Come and join me. Ambassador Katherine, who is the US Trade Representative, do come and join me. EU Commissioner for Trade and the EU Commission Vice President, Valdis Dombrovskis, and the CEO of BMW, Oliver Zipse. So we have literally the two most important people in global trade and one of the world's most important companies. So I hope we're going to solve this. Let us start, and I'll open this up to questions very shortly, but let's start perhaps with an overview of just how bad are things in the multilateral trading system. And Valdis, let's perhaps start with you. People often say in my business, you know, is it the end of globalization? Are we in an era of deglobalization? Is globalization dead?
For some reason, we have a problem with this mic. I don't know why.
You have a problem with that mic? Okay. I've been chatting away and you couldn't hear me?
It's better, yeah.
I sounded very loud to myself, but obviously you couldn't hear me. So I'm not going to repeat all of that. I'm hoping that you caught at least some of it. Let's start with you, Valdis Dombrovskis. Is globalization dead? What is this new world all about?
Good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here in Munich Security Conference. As regards globalization, I would say globalization is not dead, it's entering as a new phase. Because many of the underlying paradigms like economic strength through trade, efficiency through trade, mutual gains through trade, those paradigms have not changed. So at the same time, obviously, we are currently in more conflictual geopolitical situation. So also our trade policy response must respond to this. But actually, open and rules-based trade is part of this response. When we are looking how to end up our dependencies, for example, on Russian fossil fuel supplies, we also need to be mindful of not developing new dependencies. So we need diversified and resilient supply chains. We need to work on, for example, access to raw materials. As regards green and digital transition, which we are undertaking in Europe, probably domestically we are going to source or be able to source around some 15% of the raw materials which we need for a green and digital transition. So it means we need to have mutually beneficial partnerships with resource-rich countries. So another element which is probably changing is that during the globalization there was lots of emphasis on efficiency. And probably now there's going to be more emphasis on resilience. Just to wrap up, globalization is not changing. We are entering a different phase of globalization.
So it's not dead, but it is changing.
Indeed.
It is changing. Katherine, Ambassador, what's your take on this? Because one argument is if you have a focus on national security and on resilience, you are shifting away from the focus on efficiency that used to define multilateral trade. So how big is that change?
So I want to endorse Valdis's point of view. I agree. I think that we've had globalization for as long as human beings have exchanged and traded things with each other. What I would say is globalization is not just changing, but it's evolving. And there are pressures on the globalization, which this current version has absolutely incentivized efficiency above everything else. I agree with Valdis as well that the new version of globalization that we are working with the European Union to try to facilitate and bring into being is one that takes into account efficiency but also builds in and tries to incentivize resilience. And this is because of the pressures that we're facing that are not just geostrategic and geopolitical, but the pandemic, I think, laid bare for us on a very basic level some of the significant vulnerabilities that we have from this version of globalization. So I think that there is very much space for us working together to facilitate the evolution to a better version of globalization, one where the US and EU, I think, are very much aligned in terms of one that promotes resilience, but also fairness for our people and our workers, and also a clean and green future that can be incentivized by new rules aimed at resilience.
Well, the two of you seem to be in broad agreement, and we'll get into the details of that. I feel like, as the editor of a newspaper that's championed free trade for nearly 200 years, I may be the one that is more skeptical of this shift. But Oliver, let's hear from you. What is BMW's take on how much the global trading system is at risk?
Well, I would like to add a few from a global player. BMW is not a German company exporting cars from Germany to the rest of the world. We are a global player. We are at home in the United States, we are at home in China, and we are at home in Germany, of course. Innovation in our industry depends on globalization. I always make the point we have 12,000 suppliers, 12,000 suppliers in every country of this world. And if you start thinking from the raw material to the final car, you will patch the whole globe. So once you try to cut something off, you will make serious mistakes concerning innovation. And innovation we need for all future tasks we have. CO2 reduction, going to net zero, we need innovation. And our innovation, and the car industry is just an example for that, it depends on access to global resources. Now, the big change is and of course we feel that as well, we go away from efficiency optimization towards more security. To have the end product localized is for many reasons the right thing. That is why our biggest plant is in Spartanburg in the United States. And by the way, we are the largest exporter by value for the 9th consecutive year from the United States to the rest of the world. And the largest footprint we have in China. So we localize the final stages of assembling the product. But that is not true when you go far deeper in the supply chains. They're completely globalized. So what we have to do, I think we have to find a way to take care of safety and protective demands we have. We have that in China, we have that in Europe, and we have that in the United States. And at the same time, to protect a free and fair trade. And maybe we need a new set of rules to ensure that. But to answer your question, I think globalization is not dead and shall not be dead.
But we are shifting, as you say, from a world focused on efficiency, as all of you said, to one focused more on resilience. And that is, am I right in interpreting you as saying that is coming at some cost?
I would, yes, but that doesn't mean we deglobalize. That is not the same thing. We try to find ways to protect our trade, our business, our customers. But that is more a new set of rules, and that does not mean, by no means, decoupling and deglobalization.
There's a huge nomenclature around this. Some call it deglobalization, some call it friendshoring, some call it decoupling. There are different new words but we are, to some degree, moving away from a world of multilateral rules applied to everyone, focused on efficiency. Your querying look there, Ambassador Tai, suggests you don't agree with me.
I think that these are words that are being thrown around quite a bit in the conversation right now, but they mean very different things. Deglobalization, decoupling, in my mind, as they are used and as they are used to cause concern, suggest that we are trying to take apart the world, and that we are, in its most extreme form, it's used as an argument that the introduction of new rules that are intended to promote resilience are actually there to promote autarky. I don't actually see anyone represented on the stage here trying to be fully self-sufficient. I think that we're all sophisticated enough in terms of supply chains, the modern economy, to know that there are very few things that one single country, one single economy can produce for itself. And be able to thrive and to prosper. So I want to put a bit of a finer point on this, which is it's about an evolution of globalization. When we talk about resilience, when we talk about the supply chain challenges that we're facing, some of it goes to concentrations of supply, where some significantly critical elements of our supply chains are often located in only one region, perhaps only one country. That is just a risk. Financial, operational risk. There's also resilience with respect to trust. And I think that that reflects the rising geopolitical aspects of what is happening today and the complexities. I think that a lot of what we are doing is trying to bring about a new set of principles to tap the brakes, if you will, on efficiency pursuit and efficiency maximization, to build in the resilience around diversification of supply, parallel redundancies where you need them, and also to build those relationships of trust, because there is a lot that we cannot predict. We do know that today's world feels more unpredictable than, say, the world that we lived in 10 years ago.
So let's focus on one specific example, which is very familiar to all of you, and the two of you work on very closely, which is the EU-US relationship. Trust, incredibly important, much progress being made, but then quite some concern in Europe about some of the consequences of the Inflation Reduction Act and the sort of maybe unanticipated consequences of the America First requirements in that. This is an audience that will know the sort of broad contours of that. I know you are working on things, but maybe, Valdis, you could start by explaining how much in Europe you worry about this, what can be done to improve this situation and make, as the ambassador says, an environment of trust.
Well, maybe let's start with a couple of fundamental things. Well, first of all, EU and US are strategic allies. We must work together, and especially we must work together in a current very complicated geopolitical situation and in the context of threats which we are facing. Second, EU-US trade and investment relationship is the largest trade and investment relationship in the world. So there's lots of at stake also economically. So in a sense, we are bound to work together, and we had been working very intensively with Ambassador Tai, with new US administration to deal with a number of bilateral issues. We had set up a Trade and Technology Council where we can have more positive forward-looking agenda, how we are developing our relationships. Clearly, you mentioned Inflation Reduction Acts. Clearly, there are concerns. So, all in all, we obviously welcome the ambition of the US to tackle climate change and efforts which US is putting into this with the help of Inflation Reduction Act. At the same time, we obviously know that there are discriminatory elements which are discriminating against European companies, setting domestic content, domestic assembly requirements, which are obviously of concern. And that's why we are doing this outreach with US. We are focusing on a negotiated solution. Just earlier today, we had a bilateral meeting with Ambassador Tai where we were discussing, among other things, those issues. We have dedicated task force Actually, in just 2 weeks' time, I'm planning a visit to Washington, D.C. to continue those discussions. But it's important that those concerns are being addressed, because clearly we can work much better on green and digital transition of economies, on tackling climate change, if we work together as transatlantic allies and not against each other. And that's what we have to achieve here.
And Ambassador Tai, what do you think are the key components of such a negotiated solution? Do you recognize the Europeans' concerns? Did the US get this one wrong?
We recognize Europe's concerns, but I stand by that the United States did not get this wrong. We care very much about the European concerns. As Valdis noted, we have set up a task force between the White House and President von der Leyen's cabinet. That task force meets very, very regularly, has been working extremely closely. Valdis and I have been in regular touch on this and a number of other items as well. In fact, when I saw Valdis last month, I told him that between our work on the Inflation Reduction Act and also on the global steel arrangement, which we're negotiating, that I would be happy to visit him in Europe every single month of this year if I need to. And Valdis, we're in Germany today. It's February, and I just want to let you know that I'm keeping up my end of the bargain. But you'll come see me in March.
Early next
yes.
month, Washington, D.C.
But on the Inflation Reduction Act, look, European concerns are absolutely important to us. We understand the anxieties that are here in Europe. Look, we need Europe to succeed. We need Europe to succeed strategically, economically, politically, and industrially. Our success is bound together. That has always been clear to us. That is clear to us today. With respect to the elements of the Inflation Reduction Act, let me just make a couple points, which is you mentioned earlier the concept and the term friendshoring. I think that goes to the resilience, building trust in trading relationships. If you look at some of the areas of concern that the Europeans have raised with us on the Inflation Reduction Act, especially as they relate to electric vehicles, you will see that there is a theme of friendshoring in the way that the legislation is put together. With respect to assembly, it is North American assembly. Right? North American assembly reflecting almost 30 years now of the North American trading relationship inside of a free trade agreement. The second piece relates to inputs that go into the electric vehicle batteries. That provides for coverage that includes countries and economies with whom we have a free trade agreement, though free trade agreement is not identified. So you see there the elements of the concept of friendshoring, which I want to really highlight. In terms of our conversation, it is about building out those elements where there is space in the implementation to accommodate here and going forward the shared values and interests that we and the Europeans have. And with respect to my friend sitting on my right, we know very well the production facilities that you have in the United States. We're extremely proud of them. And if you were able to bring your beautiful cars down in value a little bit more, you too would benefit from those subsidies.
All right, Oliver, that was clearly to you. How do you see the Inflation Reduction Act, and how much of a problem is it? How much do you think the concerns of the Europeans are indeed valid? You're in an industry that is massively impacted by this. And what needs to happen?
I first would like to put my American hat on, because we have our largest production facility there. I think that has been, out of an American perspective, to recognize that there's a linkage between innovation and industry scaling up. Fully understandable. This is what IRA is to me. It's a big industrial innovation impact. So fully understandable, and we're profiting from that. We invest $1.8 billion in revamping that factory into electric mobility. My second hat is, when I take a car being built in Decoupling and export it to the United States, in the first round, the cars were not illegal before the credit, despite the fact that they were emission-free. So we find a solution now which is okay, this is not perfect. When the car is leased, the car is deemed to be a commercial vehicle, and then you get the credit. It's okay, it's not perfect. I think we have to, looking into the future, we have to recognize two things. To have an industrial strategy and industrial policy, Europe had it for a long time, Germany had it for a long time, China has it, the United States now have it as well. So we have to, that's a fact of life. I think there's a fourth pillar we have to talk about. We talk about China, United States, or Northern America and Europe. There's a fourth pillar rising. It's the rest of the middle-sized countries, Southeast Asia, all of Africa, South America, who do not want to belong to any three of them. They do not want to make this choice of, am I a friend? I'm a part of that friend shoring, or I'm a part of that enemy shoring. And we should take care that there's a fourth pillar rising. And that's a very resilient approach. To look countries which are trying to stay as neutral as possible. And we are watching very closely what the fourth pillar countries are doing. They're first of all very hungry, they're growing. They want to be part of this economic world. They want to be part of the trade agreements of this world. And I think there is an opportunity for them to stay as neutral as possible, as long, of course, they share the right values and are part of a free trade agreement. And I think that could even propel globalization even forward to push innovations worldwide.
So you make a strong case that that's what those countries want to do, but many of those countries will say, and have said this to me as I've been there, the Americans are trying to force us to choose in a world. You're either with us or against us, and I'm exaggerating only slightly, and that the use of economic tools, it's not just investment incentives within America, but it is export controls, it's investment screening. There's a whole panoply of economic weaponry that is now impinging on the global trading system. And so I wanted to ask you whether you thought that it was going to be possible for countries to try not to be part of this, or are they going to be forced to be on one side or the other?
I think looking at which part of the industry you look like, that is very much possible. Normally, we look at the final stage of value creation. So where is the battery factory located? This is the final step. There are many, many, many steps before. And if you are at the refining industries level, they are today completely globalized. And there is no country is able to cut that off. Because there are two things in the world which are not equally distributed in the world. It's the weather and raw materials. You have to rely on trade to get all elements of the periodic table to the right place. In our case, it's a car, but it could be a computer, it could be a windmill, it could be anything. So I think if you only look at the final stage of the industrial world, you can localize. You can have a term like this is friendshoring. If you go much deeper, the world is completely connected from A to Z. And I think we have to be very aware that it's impossible to cut these supply chains off, which are very much, which have grown over the past decades. And if you cut them off, you cut your innovation path off. I think we have to be aware of that.
Valdis Dombrovskis, as you hear this, do you, and in the context of all of these new tools of economic weaponry, does it worry you that we are heading down a path of using more economic tools in ways that will make this global supply chain ever less tenable?
Yes. Obviously, we see some tendency on weaponization of trade. We saw, for example, how Russia was using its natural gas supplies as a tool of blackmail and manipulation. So we had to veer off this dependency on those supplies. We see more tendencies towards protectionism, mercantilism. So this fragmentation is indeed a risk. So on one hand, therefore, it's very important that we remain committed and we continue to push for multilateral, rules-based global trading system. But at the same time, also as EU, we need to be able to react when others are not playing by the rules. So we have also developed our own autonomous tools to be able to react to different situations, like, for example, the anti-coercion instrument, which is currently under legislation, the strengthened enforcement regulation, foreign subsidies instrument, international procurement instrument, FDI screening, and so on and so forth. So we also have developed this autonomous toolbox to be able to defend ourselves if others are not playing by the rules and are weaponizing trade. But I think it's for everyone's benefit to work and to maintain this multilateral system.
So I'm going to open in just a second to questions, but one more last question for the three of you from me, which is about an organization that you may have forgotten exists, the World Trade Organization. It's not front of mind nowadays, but Ambassador Tai, you said in December, and I quote, that the WTO is getting itself on very, very thin ice, end quote, by ruling that the Trump-era steel and aluminum tariffs violated its rules, and that it shouldn't get into the business of second-guessing national security. But since everything nowadays is framed in terms of national security, doesn't that mean that the WTO doesn't really have a role in your view?
So, Zanny, I'm going to take apart each part of your question. First, the WTO may not be front of mind for you, but it's front of mind for me every single day. And I believe that is also true for Valdis. So first, let me begin by reaffirming the Biden administration, the United States' commitment to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and multilateralism. Multilateralism has been and continues to be, for the United States and for Europe, core part of our vision for a better world that we are all working together to achieve. To your question about my comments in December on the WTO panel report, there are actually two panel reports that came out of the WTO in December, both of them dealing with national security and the national security exception within the WTO rules. The first one relating to the steel and aluminum tariffs, and the second one relating to the United States changing the way we address imports from Hong Kong in response to the loss of autonomy for Hong Kong as a result of China's national security law being imposed in Hong Kong. In both cases, the WTO ruled against us. I stand by my comments that the WTO is on very, very thin ice, but let me elaborate. The thin ice is with respect to the WTO's credibility, not just with the United States, but with respect to the way we understand sovereignty, the roles of sovereign nations, and national security decision-making. So a couple points I want to make here, which is it is absolutely consistent for us to be at the same time completely committed to multilateralism and the World Trade Organization as an institution, and at the same time completely committed to our national security responsibilities to our own people and to our allies and to their people. Since the GATT came into being in the 1940s after World War II, we, the United States and our allies, have had a shared understanding about the national security exception at the WTO. The two panel reports that I've highlighted demonstrate a walking away from that shared understanding in ways that should be seriously concerning, not just to economic policymakers, but especially to national security decision makers. And that is the point that I want to emphasize. From our perspective, the WTO is absolutely an important institution. At the same time, it is now almost 30 years old. The world today is very different from the one that was in place in 1994-95 when the WTO came about. The WTO needs reform. The WTO in many ways actually is not kept up, and in some ways has drifted quite far afield from some of the core tenets that we still believe in today. So we believe deeply in the WTO. We're committed to its reform. Its reform must include addressing how and where the institution seems to be going with respect to national security decision-making of its members.
Valdis Dombrovskis, thank you, Ambassador Tai. Valdis Dombrovskis, how do you respond to that? Do you think the WTO is in need of reform? Is it still effective? I mean, it is the underpinning of the multilateral trade system.
WTO is clearly in need of reform, and that's a priority for the EU actually to push forward this WTO reform. We agreed already in a previous ministerial conference in June last year to work on this and to aim for meaningful results at the next ministerial conference. Basically, reform is needed across all three main functions of the WTO: negotiation, monitoring and deliberation, and dispute settlement. We have prepared from the EU side proposals across all three core functions, and now working intensively with our partners, including the United States, to make sure that there is tangible progress and they really are able to achieve the outcomes. So just some elements. So one, we need to bring WTO rule book, so to say, into 21st century. So as regards digital trade rules, but also as regards many of the new challenges which we are currently facing on competitive neutrality, on level playing field, on intellectual property rights, and so on and so forth. So clearly there is a need for update of the rules, and we know that the dispute settlement system currently is not functioning, so we need to work on restoration of, I would say, reformed dispute settlement system as well. So and we think it's important that we do this WTO reform for WTO to stay relevant and to be able to effectively provide this multilateral trade framework in a changed both geopolitical context but also in a changed economic context with a greening and digitalization of our economies.
Thank you. Let us open up to questions or comments. Yes, gentleman there, 4 rows back.
Thank you. Richard Fontaine with the Center for New American Security. Ambassador Tai and Vice President Dombrovskis, both of you talked about reforms to the WTO, to the rules of dispute settlement mechanism. I wonder if you might tell us a bit about what reforms you might have in mind, what specific proposals you have for reforming the WTO.
Ambassador Tai, let's start with you.
Certainly. Well, I appreciate the question very much, because when we talk about reform, I will say that as difficult as it is to achieve consensus in a 164-member organization, there is a consensus reflected in the 12th Ministerial Conference that the WTO is in need of reform. That's a significant outcome of the 12th Ministerial Conference. In terms of the areas of reform, I think that we've also been very clear, and the membership is also, I think, quite agreed that the dispute settlement function is one of at least 3 different functions within the WTO, and that reform needs to be comprehensive across the 3 because they impact each other. So, for example, the dispute settlement function, in our view, has really become extremely activist, if you will, to the point where it has, in our view, hampered the negotiation functions over the last many, many years. So we had a very, very robust outcome of the 12th Ministerial Conference last June. That only happens with the agreement and the participation of all 164 members, including the European Union, which accounts for 28 members, the EU plus the 27 member states, and the United States, which we're very proud of. But also, it was the first time in almost 10 years that there was a multilateral, full WTO set of agreements on anything. The last time it happened was on the Trade Facilitation Agreement, which happened in 2013. So I just want to highlight that while the dispute settlement function gets a lot of the attention, rightly so, the negotiation function has been desperately underperforming, in large part because 164 members having to come to consensus is really, really hard. Even this time around, I think that there were 2 all-nighters that we pulled. is if you are able to obtain new rules, not by negotiating them, but by obtaining them through a litigation process, then you understand how these two functions being out of balance affects the health of the entire system. The third function of the WTO, obviously, is its committee structure, daily monitoring the operationalization of 164 members being able to cooperate and communicate with each other. There also, I wanted to highlight that every single committee that the United States participates in, we have shown up this year with proposals on paper for how to improve and reform the work that is being done in those committees. In terms of dispute settlement, I've talked a little bit about the vision that dispute settlement support the negotiation function, not undermine it. Other aspects of what we are looking for is a dispute settlement function that is accessible to all members of the WTO. If you look right now at the statistics, we, the United States, are often characterized as the most frequent user of the dispute settlement system. We're also the most frequently sued at the WTO. So we do know this system very well. The Europeans, I think, are pretty much number 2 up there, but it's actually a very, very small subset of the 164 who even use the dispute settlement system. The dispute settlement system should be there to facilitate the settlement of disputes that come up between WTO members, which is a natural part of the trading system. If you have a system that's only used by a handful of members, then that requires reform as well. So we're looking for a system that is more accessible to membership. We're looking for a system that has more modes used than just litigation. Litigation is expensive, time-consuming. That in itself is often a barrier to entry for a lot of the developing country members and members who have never used the dispute settlement system before. So we are looking for reform across a number of different areas, and it is all with the view of empowering the WTO to be a more effective multilateral institution.
Thank you. Oliver, can I get a view from, let's say, the real world of industry here? How much does the WTO matter to you?
It's not part of our daily life. It's not. On the other hand, when we think back 30 years ago, it was created after Japan came up economically, became a superpower. Then it was created because we needed fair trade rules. And apparently it has to be reformed now again, because fair and free trade is not perceived as free and fair if security matters are not part of the game. But it does not conflict in our daily life. So the question is, should it be? I cannot give you that answer. For us, it's just there. We don't use it rapidly for solving disputes. Maybe we should do that. We try to do that bilaterally. Free trade agreements are far more important to us than using the WTO. And bilateral discussions, of course, as well. You know.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Another question or comment? Nobody? In which case, I get the chance to ask more, which is excellent. Thank you. I'd like to ask about another new frontier for trade, which is trade's role or border adjustment tariffs' role in the transition to net zero. Is this going to become a conventional part of the policy tool-making machinery, and will the two of you, and thus the United States and the European Union, coordinate on this? Valdis Dombrovskis, you first.
Indeed. Fight against climate change is a global endeavor, and all policies must play their role, including trade policy. And that's very much what we are doing in the EU, both domestically. For example, we recently had a review of what we call trade and sustainable development, strengthening exactly those sustainability provisions when we are negotiating our free trade agreements. And for example, the free trade agreement we agreed with New Zealand was, so to say, made according to those new sustainability standards. Second, it's multilateral, so that's why EU was one of the co-initiators of Trade Ministers Coalition for Climate. It was launched in January in Davos, which is exactly the forum where those ministers, those countries which are willing to spearhead this effort will meet and discuss how trade can contribute to the sustainability, how trade can contribute to fight against climate change, and so to say feed into this into broader multilateral work also in WTO agenda. Also bilaterally with US, we agreed in a previous Trade and Technology Council to work on a transatlantic initiative on sustainable trade. Once again, to deal with exactly those issues, so we'll be seeing how we can advance it further now in the next Trade and Technology Council meeting in the next few months. So clearly that trade has a role to play, and EU is willing, so to say, to lead from the front in this effort.
Katherine, Ambassador Tai, what's the Washington perspective on this discussion? Does it make sense to have these border adjustment tariffs? Will you be working together to ensure that the friend-shoring, if you will, or the friends approach to the climate transition is together, and then there are obviously large economies elsewhere that might not do so well out of this?
Well, if you look at what the purpose of a border adjustment with respect to carbon is doing, it is a part of an incentive system, a market-based incentive system for addressing the climate challenge that we have. So to the extent that we agree that the solution lies in a market-based system, then I think that you understand the intellectual underpinnings for why carbon-based adjustments need to be made in a global economy. The European Union is very far ahead in terms of its CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I believe you are still in your trilogue process, but in terms of the cake that's being baked, it is clearly in the oven, and you can see it rising in the oven. In the United States, I know that there are legislators who are looking at a U.S. system. This is exactly the type of area, like in inflation reduction, like in global steel and aluminum trade, and also like in large civil aircraft, and semiconductors, where the U.S. and the EU have so much to gain by working together, because I think that the fundamentals of what we value and what we're trying to accomplish is, if not the same, extremely similar. So yes, I think that there's a lot of conversation that we have been having, that we will continue to have, to try to design systems where the US and the EU market can be joined to leverage and to create incentives for the kinds of behaviors we know we need for a sustainable future. And that goes to clean technology as well as fair trade. And the one point I wanted to add in here is when we were talking about trade tools before and global supply chains, I wanted to also add into the conversation, make sure we don't lose it, the work that Valdis and I have been doing, and that we've been doing in the G7 context as well, and with others around forced labor and global supply chains. That also is a part of our toolbox. I would not call it a weapon, but it is in line with this idea that trade tools can be used to drive sustainable, fair, and clean behaviors in the global economy that we know we need to have in order for us to have a sustainable and bright future that we're all looking to build.
So we're coming to the, thank you, we're coming to the end of this, and you told us that the two of you are meeting every month this year, and I'm sure we all want to know, and I suspect Oliver will want to know what the outcomes of these meetings are going to be. So Oliver, I'm going to start with you. What is top of your wish list for the ambassador and the vice president here to agree on in the next few months?
My wish is a free trade zone between the United States and Europe.
Okay, very clear. Ambassador Dombrovskis, when's that going to happen?
I mean, you know, if we're Santa Claus here, it depends on how good of a boy Oliver is going to be.
Okay, that's probably something we should set as a strategic goal, but in between there are many practical things which we can do, which we can achieve through Trade and Technology Council. We have to sort out some of the Inflation Reduction Act business. We are working to deliver this year this global steel and aluminium arrangement, just to mention some initiatives.
So those are concrete things that should happen this year?
Exactly.
All right, and Ambassador Tai, the last word's yours.
Well, let me put it this way. Valdis and I, our teams, our governments, our economies are working every single day to enhance this relationship because so much depends on the success of this relationship. Just take a pause and think about where this relationship was approximately 2 years ago, and then gauge how much progress we have made as of today. I think that Valdis and I were just talking earlier today about 2023 being a gangbuster year for us to accelerate our cooperation and our coordination to build on the success that we've already seen.
So that's an excellent place to end. 2023 will be a gangbuster year for the United States and the European Union to accelerate their cooperation on these trade issues. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.